It's like a parallel universe every time the NDP leader stands up and attacks the very government he's a part of.
Welcome back to Northern Perspective, everyone. I'm Cypher.
And I'm Fox. We're back to question period today, where it was the Pierre and Justin show, but only one of them was the star. We'll let you decide who it was.
Let's take a look.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition
goes telling Canadians they've never had it so good when after 8 years he's not worth the cost of food. According to the hunger count by the Food Banks Canada, I quote, the number of people living in households struggling to afford food due to a lack of money have increased to the highest level on record, end quote. A record-smashing 2 million visits to Canadian food banks in a month. And his plan is to quadruple the carbon tax on the farmers and the truckers who bring us our food. How many Canadians have to go hungry or homeless before he axes this terrible tax?
So this is getting serious, folks. It already is serious, but this is getting to another level. It wasn't so long ago, only a few months, where the Conservative talking point was that 1.5 million people were going to food banks in a month. That's increased almost by 30%. So that's serious.
Well, and especially when there's only about 40 million people in this country.
Yeah, that's 5% of the population.
That's not acceptable. That's not acceptable in any country, but that's especially not acceptable in a country like Canada.
And the problem is many of you are saying, well, I'm not exactly surprised, because when you take a walk outside in your town, it doesn't really matter where you live anymore. All you see is tent cities everywhere.
Just poverty and homelessness.
Like it's awful. At one point, you know, homeless people were primarily people that were unfortunately mentally ill. They were strictly, you know, drug addicts just on the street. Now it's people with jobs living in cars because they can't afford a home. Like this is becoming a third world country.
And it's because of this government's economic policies. It's not because there's not enough things in this country to sustain the population. It's that this government is actively putting Canadians into poverty to push its climate agenda.
Well, the problem is they don't have an economic policy. Their economic policy is borrow more and Canadians will pay for it later.
You'll forgive me if I don't think about monetary policy.
Well, this is the result.
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
No Canadians struggling with the costs of food and groceries and housing. That's why we continue to step up to support them with measures like a $10 a day childcare, dental care for children, and child benefit checks. All measures that the Conservative Party has stood against, Mr. Speaker. We will continue to help Canadians. We'll continue our work to lift hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty, to lift over 1 million Canadians out of poverty. But there's much more to do. We will keep doing it instead of giving in to the Conservatives' demands for more cuts, for cuts to services for Canadians, to cuts to supports that people rely on.
Yeah, so you're going to continue to make the population even more dependent on the government.
But above and beyond that, all those things that he listed right now, at least, they don't do anything unless you have kids. Like, you're not getting a child benefit unless you have kids. You're not getting $10 daycare unless you need to put a kid in daycare. You're not getting dental benefits right now unless you have a kid under 12. This does nothing for seniors. This does nothing for single folks in the bottom income brackets. This does nothing for anybody unless you have kids. And let me tell you, having a kid is expensive. That stuff that he's talking about isn't really going to do anything for anybody.
Right. And guess what? Kids eat too. Kids eat too, Justin, but you seem to forget that.
Especially when they're going through a growth spurt. Oh my goodness.
So it's just funny. Like, you have to laugh at this point because this guy literally does have no idea what he's doing.
Actually, Canadians are making cuts to their food. They're cutting back on their standard of living after 8 years of this prime minister who's not worth the cost. Back to that nightmarish report from Food Banks Canada, one Nova Scotian reported to researchers, quote, seniors are having trouble with home heating and many times have to choose between food and heating. And with heating bills coming up again soon and a cold winter expected, Nova Scotians will have to pay his carbon tax, which he plans to quadruple. How many Nova Scotia seniors will have to go homeless or hungry in order to pay his massive carbon tax hike?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member actually cared about seniors, he wouldn't have been part of the government that raised the retirement aid, driving seniors further into poverty. We brought it back to 65. We continued to step up with supports for seniors, and we're going to continue to stand to defend their pensions as well. While his Conservative colleagues are attacking the CPP, he's finally realized that perhaps the CPP is a good thing, has come out in defense of it after decades, Mr. Speaker, of attacking seniors and their pensions, of attacking the CPP. We're going to continue unequivocally to stand to support seniors right across the country, unlike the Leader of the Opposition.
You know who's attacking seniors, Justin? You. You know how you're attacking seniors? Because you've made life so unaffordable that the seniors have to go back to work. Why is the unemployment rate so low? Because seniors have to go back to work.
Yeah, I just read an article, I think it was in the National Post yesterday, that said that seniors are starting to have to go back to work, and they're taking up entry-level jobs at places like Walmart or fast food places.
Right. So now you have the kids that are in the high schools that are looking for work, and they can't get those entry-level jobs because seniors are in there. And by no means are we blaming the seniors. You got to do what you got to do.
But the fact that the seniors even have to do that, you know, when you get to a certain age, unless you want a job, you know, to socialize and for something to do, like that's totally acceptable. But when you've decided that I want to retire, but I can no longer afford to not be retired because of this horrible government and its economic policies, like that is a tragedy.
It's awful because, and I can't even imagine that. When you go through that process of retiring and leaving the workforce, I know a lot of people who've done it. It is a mental leap. Like your mentality completely changes. When you finally get there, you've worked all your life to get there, you retire, and then you're thinking, I can, you know, finally relax, I can enjoy and do what I want to do. Then to be confronted with climbing back up that wall and getting back into the workforce, that must be a terrible time mentally to go through that.
I can relate a little bit just because I don't think after being a stay-at-home mom for all these years that I'd be able to go back to work in the job that I initially went to college and trained for, because I don't remember any of it. So to have to go back after all these years, I don't know if I could do it. You know what I mean? So I think that there's like this huge hurdle that folks who have been out of the workforce for a long time would face when they would go back into the workforce.
It's terrible. And we see people in the comments tell us all the time. So everything that Pierre is telling us in question period, it's on point, unfortunately.
Not only have we always defended the CPP, the number of seniors requiring food banks was drastically lower when we were in government. Now, let me take a quote a British Columbian who reported to the Food Banks Canada report the following. The cost of housing is indescribable. Many of our users are paying 50% of their annual income in rent to provide for accommodations if they can find them, end quote. This is the housing hell that this Prime Minister and the NDP have caused after 8 years. Will he realize that we don't need more photo ops, we don't need more bureaucracy, we need more homes?
Le très honorable Premier ministre.
Mr. Speaker, as the Leader of the Opposition has put forward no plan for housing, he lacks credibility on this issue. We are taking bold action to get more affordable homes built. Indeed, just today, the Minister of Housing is in British Columbia, is in Kelowna for our most recent Housing Accelerator announcement, which will streamline building permits and allow for high-density housing near public transit, spurring the construction of up to 20,000 new housing units over the next decade in in Kelowna. We're also working with Kelowna to make city-owned lands available for housing in partnership with nonprofits, and we look forward to sign more agreements right across the country, delivering for Canadians on housing.
Okay, so we were curious, and we've just spent probably the last 30 minutes, which you don't need to experience with us, going through some math and going through some graphs. So we looked at Stephen Harper and the total amount of homes that he built during his time as Prime Minister. That number is 1,919,368 homes. That's completed. Keys indoors. Trudeau, he is at 1,407,339 homes. Now, that doesn't account for the extra time that Stephen Harper had while he was in office. So adjusted for that, same time period, Stephen Harper completed 1,357,985 homes. So you may say, oh, well, that means the Liberal plan is working. Is it? The population in 2015, when Harper left office, was 35,700,000 Canadians. The population now is 40,100,000 Canadians.
And you typically need one home per 2 Canadians.
So you may say, well, what does that mean? Well, what it means, if you look at the market, is that during Harper's time, houses were affordable. The rate at which they were building homes was affordable. It was approximately $48,000 a year. Trudeau has only increased that by 2,000 homes per year. Per year. How many people have come into Canada in the last 8 years? 5 million people.
That's a lot. That's over 500,000 per year. And those are the ones that we know of. You heard in previous videos that the immigration minister lost 1 million people. They lost track of people in this country.
So for them to say, oh, our housing accelerator is working. No, it isn't. And the other thing, I can find nowhere where it actually states what this money actually goes to, because it doesn't go to homes.
Yeah, they're not giving this money to homeowners or potential homeowners or even landlords and saying, here, build a house.
So what this sounds like is a cash grab by the municipalities to get federal funding. And all they're doing is saying, well, we're gonna look at completing 2,000 new homes over 3 years. Zippity doo-dah. People need homes now. And what are you doing? Like 2,000 homes over 3 years, that's atrocious. What are you doing? That doesn't sound like it's speeding up the bureaucracy. It sounds like it's adding to it by giving the municipalities more money just to screw around. So the one confirmed city that is actually, receiving this money, he's announcing all these other ones, is London, Ontario. If you live in London, Ontario, I'd be asking some questions of your city council where that money is going, because I don't think for a second it's actually going to build houses.
L'honorable député de Burnaby Sud.
2 million Canadians had to use the food bank in 1 month alone. This is a direct result of Liberals and Conservatives who continue to search and distract from what's going on, when the real reason of what's causing this, Canadians know really well. When they were asked the question, greedy CEOs. Now, why won't the Prime Minister understand what Canadians already do?
Oh my God, I am so glad this guy is not Prime Minister of this country.
And never will be.
Never will be.
Not on my watch.
I don't know which Canadians they were asking this poll. My guess is it was only people in your party. Because most Canadians understand the real reason that everything is more expensive. It's called inflation, you moron.
And what's causing that inflation right now?
Inflationary spending and perpetual debt that we are carrying as Canadians because of the government.
And the carbon tax is making everything more expensive. The food from the farm all the way to your table, it gets hit at the farm, it gets hit at the grocery store. You know, you have to pay extra on the gas to get it from the grocery store to your home.
And that's that hidden inflation that isn't recorded in the real number.
Because taxes are not included as part of inflation.
Right.
Because it's not the consumer price index, it's tax.
So it's hidden. So kudos to Trudeau for hiding his carbon tax on everything. But this is the reason. And Canadians understand this. Canadians aren't stupid, Jagmeet.
Le très honorable Premier Ministre.
Mr. Speaker, we understand and we see firsthand how Canadians are struggling with the cost of food, groceries, and housing. That's why we're taking concrete actions to support them through this, whether it be with the grocery rebate, whether it be with $10 a day childcare, whether it be with a dental care that's going to support young children, whether it be the initiatives we're taking across this country to create good jobs and economic growth, whether it be with the GST rebate checks, whether it be with the climate action rebate that's putting money in people's pockets right across the country. We're going to continue to be there for Canadians as we had in years past, as we lifted hundreds of thousands of kids out of poverty, as we've lifted over 1 million Canadians out of poverty. We know there's more work to do, and we are going to continue to do it, Mr. Speaker.
So we've just been taking a look at Trudeau's claim on poverty. Now, this is very difficult to get into because different places give different results. And the other thing is that technically, the money that the government was giving everybody as CERB is income. So they effectively increased everybody's income by a significant amount who took CERB. The other thing that they are counting as income is the grocery rebate, the child benefit. They're probably even factoring in all of the money that they're giving for this $10 a day daycare stuff. So I think, even though we don't have evidence to support this, I think they are taking all of that, averaging it out over the population, and assuming that because of that, it raises people above the poverty line, which is an artificial number. And that's where they're getting this money from. Because everyone should be listening to that saying, what are you talking about? How is that possible? You are bragging that you've lifted all of these people out of poverty. That's impossible if the number of people that are actually going to food banks has increased to 1.5 million, and then an additional 500,000 on top of that to 2 million, which is the most in history.
One theory that I had that we have not been able to prove, so again, this is just a theory, is that the dollar figure for what would be considered the poverty line has stayed the same over the past few years and not adjusted to inflation, whereas possibly wages have. So I was able to find some information that stated that the poverty line was just under $37,000 in 2015. Now, if they're still using that value as the poverty line, but it costs now so much more money to house and feed yourself, maybe the poverty line should be at 50,000. I don't know. These are just examples that I'm throwing out. But maybe it should be a lot higher than what they're considering, and that wages have gone up a bit to help offset that 37,000 that would have been considered the poverty line. But really it's 50. Like, it's so convoluted, and we are not having any success finding hard information, like actual stats. But one stat I have found was right from StatsCan's website that says that in 2020, the poverty rate of all Canadians was 6.4%. So that means that 6.4% of all Canadians were below the poverty line. But in 2021, that rate went up to 7.4%. So I'm wondering, if when Trudeau makes these claims that we lifted all these people out of poverty, he's talking about the old stats. Like back in 2015 when he took office, the poverty rate was, I think it says 16.5%. So maybe he's saying, oh, we brought it down so much. But now it's going back up. And he's not talking about the going back up part. He's talking about when it came down.
Well, here's the other thing. There's a significant dip in the poverty line, according to StatsCan, from 2019 to 2020. Now, again, how is that possible, everybody? How is it that nobody was working and we had less poverty? That supports my theory that they're using the CERB payments to justify their excuse that, oh, well, Canadians were paid more.
And StatsCan does not have stats for last year, 2022, or the current year, 2023. So the best that we have to go on is that little increase from 2020 to 2021. And that's the most recent we've got.
So either way, it seems like there's some shadiness going on, unsurprisingly, with the manipulation of the numbers in order to justify these claims by Trudeau.
It's like a parallel universe every time the NDP leader stands up and attacks the very government he's a part of and laments how miserable life is for Canadians after 2 years of him being part of voting for quadrupling the carbon tax, driving up inflationary deficits, and, of course, driving 2 million people to the food banks in a single month. He blames greed for all this hunger. He's right. It is the greed of Liberal and NDP politicians who keep taking more and more from Canadians. Will they reverse these disastrous policies, Mr. Speaker?
That was amazing. And I want to point out that the opposition does not typically go after the other opposition parties. But in this case, I think it's fair game because the NDP is not really opposition. They're the coalition government at this point.
Well, the opposition has started to go after each other in the last month or so, and we've shown it to you on this channel. And why is that? Well, is it because an election's coming? Maybe. That's the theory. Because, again, the rhetoric has substantially changed. So, yeah, they're going to be taking pot shots at each other to try and score political points. But it's beautiful to see Pierre vocalize everything that we see on Twitter, everything that we see on YouTube, and it just adds credence and satisfaction that he feels the exact same as the rest of us do, and that Jagmeet is such a hypocrite. He votes for everything Trudeau wants to do, but then turns around and criticizes it. It is an absolute gong show of a relationship that they have, and hopefully it doesn't last much longer.